In the glittering towers of New York's financial district, one man reigned like a king, Alexander Crowne. At only 39, his empire spanned continents built on ruthless takeovers and an intellect that made boardrooms tremble. His name was whispered with reverence, fear, and envy. To the world, he was untouchable. But behind the panoramic windows of his 86th floor penthouse, Alexander carried a silence heavier than gold. Each night he did not return to a home, it was a museum of wealth. Gleaming marble floors, cold steel sculptures, paintings worth more than suburban houses, all perfectly arranged yet lifeless. He had the best of everything: rare wines, tailored suits, watches that could buy entire neighborhoods. And yet, his chest ached with a void nothing could fill. The source of that emptiness hung around his neck, hidden beneath the silk of custom-made shirts, a small silver locket. Its surface-worn hinges fragile, engraving a willow bending toward a crescent moon, intricate yet faded. Inside the picture frame was empty. For Alexander, it was both a talisman and a torment, the only inheritance from a woman he had never met, his mother. Beside the locket lingered a fragment of memory, or perhaps only a ghost. A melody, a wordless lullaby drifting somewhere in his mind. He could hum a few haunting notes, but the lyrics had vanished, swallowed by time. For years, he poured fortunes into tracing its origin. Musicologists, folklorists, historians, all returned with the same verdict: unique, untraceable, a family song. But whose family? He had none. That night, after orchestrating another ruthless acquisition, Alexander should have been celebrating with his team at a Michelin-starred restaurant. Instead, he stood alone in his sterile penthouse holding a glass of untouched whiskey, staring into the city lights. Billions in assets, millions who admired him, yet not one soul had ever sung that song to him. Then, driven by restlessness, by a hunger for something real, he dismissed his driver, slid behind the wheel of a vintage Aston Martin, and let the rain-soaked streets guide him. He didn't know it yet, but tonight would bring more than a storm. It would lead him to the lullaby in its entirety and to a truth that would shatter everything he thought he knew. The rain that night was merciless, pounding against the windshield of Alexander Crowne's Aston Martin like 1,000 tiny drums. The wipers fought valiantly, but the downpour blurred the skyline into neon smears and shadows. He drove aimlessly past Midtown's glass cathedrals, through the frantic pulse of the village, until the city gave way to quieter streets lined with brownstones and shuttered shops. This was Brooklyn, a world far removed from the sterile boardrooms he ruled. Alexander hadn't set foot here in years yet. Something in the cracked sidewalks and weathered storefronts felt oddly grounding. Then the Aston's engine, usually a symphony of precision, sputtered, coughed, and died. He cursed under his breath. Of all nights, his meticulously maintained car had chosen this storm to betray him. For a moment, he considered calling security. A billionaire stranded in the rain, tomorrow's headlines wrote themselves. But then through the sheets of water, he saw it, a warm golden light, flickering against the storm. A neon sign buzzing weekly, Harper's Diner. The letters hummed like a relic from another age, the kind of place no one in his social circle would ever set foot. He could stay in the dead car wrapped in tailored wool, or he could follow the light. With a resigned sigh, Alexander pulled his collar high and dashed through the rain. A soft bell chimed as he pushed the door open, the storm replaced instantly by the hum of ordinary life. The diner was narrow, worn at the edges, yet warm. Red vinyl booths, a jukebox older than he was, the air thick with coffee, bacon, and cinnamon. Behind the counter, an old man wiped glasses with unhurried ease, and in the far corner, a young woman cradled a child against her chest, humming softly. Alexander slipped into a booth, noting the curious glances. His suit alone cost more than the diner's entire inventory, and he knew he didn't belong here. The old man shuffled over, menu in hand, voice gravelly but kind. "Nasty night, huh?" "Black coffee," Alexander replied, clipped foreign in the cozy space. But his focus wasn't on the coffee. It was on the woman in the corner. Her uniform faded, eyes shadowed with exhaustion, yet her face radiant with a tenderness that felt alien to his world. The child stirred. She leaned close lips at his ear, and the sound that filled the room froze Alexander where he sat. It wasn't just a hum. It was the melody. The heavy ceramic mug trembled in Alexander's hand, forgotten halfway to his lips. The diner's noise receded, the hiss of the coffee machine, the scrape of forks, even the relentless drumming of rain all dissolved into silence. Because what he heard was impossible. The lullaby, not the fractured ghost that haunted his sleepless nights, not the empty notes he hummed when loneliness became unbearable, but the full song, alive, complete, flowing with certainty, with love, with a history he had spent his life chasing. Her voice wasn't trained, not polished. It didn't need to be. It was gentle, fragile, yet carried a warmth that pierced straight through him. Each word a key unlocking rusted locks inside his chest. The willow weeps, but not in sorrow. It sheds its leaves for a new tomorrow. The river flows to meet the sea. My dearest love, come back to me. Alexander's throat tightened. His pulse thundered. His vision blurred. Suddenly, he wasn't a billionaire atop an ivory tower. He was a lost child again, aching for a mother he had never known. In her arms, the little boy no more than 4 sighed, his restlessness soothed into peace by the lullaby's embrace. The woman pressed a kiss to his forehead, her face glowing with a pure devotion Alexander hadn't witnessed in years. Then, as if pulled by some invisible thread, her eyes lifted and met his. For her, it was a fleeting glance at a stranger staring too long. For him, it was a miracle, a living echo of the one melody that had shaped his entire existence. His heart pounded so violently it rattled the locket against his chest. How could this woman, a waitress in a rundown diner, know a song no scholar, no historian, no archivist on earth had ever recognized? The air thickened with unspoken questions, his mind spinning. Was this fate, a cruel joke, or the first crack in the wall of secrets that had imprisoned him for decades? For Alexander Crowne, the financial king, the market conqueror, the world had just changed. In this tiny diner under flickering neon and the storm's fury, the empire he had built began to crumble. And it all began with a lullaby. Alexander Crowne shoved the cup aside, his movement stiff, deliberate. His tall frame, nearly 6'3", rose from the booth, casting a long shadow across the red vinyl floor. Every eye in the diner seemed to follow him as he strode down the narrow aisle, each step louder than the storm outside. The woman's head snapped up, startled. Instinctively, she clutched her child tighter, pulling him close. Weariness shifted into defense. Her voice was soft, yet steady. "My name is Lily May. Is there something I can help you with?" Alexander ignored the pleasantry. His voice was low, edged with danger. "The song. The one you just sang. Where did you learn it?" Lily blinked, confusion flickering in her tired eyes. I don't understand. It's just a lullaby. It's not just a lullaby." Alexander snapped the control he wielded in every other arena of life, fraying. "That song is private. It's a family song. My family's song." For a beat, silence hung between them, heavy and taut. Then Lily's expression shifted, confusion giving way to indignation. She lifted her chin, her voice sharp as steel. You're mistaken. That song belongs to my family. My grandmother sang it to my mother. My mother sang it to me, and now I sing it to my son. It's ours." There was no tremor in her words, no trace of deceit. This wasn't the lie of a con artist. It was the fierce conviction of a mother defending her heritage. Alexander's instincts, those that saw every interaction as a negotiation, a scheme, a trap, began to falter. Dizzying questions flooded him. 2 families. 1 song. "How? What was your grandmother's name?" He pressed urgency, softening his tone. Rose Lily answered, her eyes narrowing. "And I don't see how that's any of your business." The diner's owner, George, an older man with kind, weathered features, noticed the tension. He shuffled over, spatula in hand, like a makeshift weapon. "Is there a problem here, Lily?" "I'm fine, George," she replied, though her gaze never wavered from Alexander's. For the first time in years, the billionaire who had cowed CEOs and politicians felt unmoored. His familiar weapons threats, power control were useless here. If he wanted answers, he would have to do something utterly foreign to him. He would have to show weakness. Alexander exhaled, lowering himself slowly into the booth opposite Lily May. His expensive shoes squeaked against the vinyl as he sat, his presence both an intrusion and a plea. For a man who commanded empires, this was uncharted territory. Vulnerability had never been his currency until now. "My name is Alexander Crowne," he said at last, voice softer, tinged with weariness. "I never knew my parents. I was abandoned at a foundling home as an infant. The only thing I have from my mother is a silver locket, and a fragment of that melody. Just the tune. I've spent years, fortunes trying to trace it, and until tonight I believed I was the only soul alive who knew it existed." He reached beneath his shirt. When he placed the tarnished locket on the table, the diner's dim light caught the engraving, a willow bending toward the crescent moon. Lily's posture shifted instantly. Recognition flickered across her face, her lips parting as if a long-buried memory had surged back. "The willow weeps, but not in sorrow," she whispered, repeating the lullaby's first line. Alexander leaned forward, desperation cracking his usually impenetrable calm. "Please, I need your help. Tell me everything your grandmother told you about the song, about that symbol." Lily's jaw tightened. She glanced down at her sleeping son Cody, his tiny chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. Her voice hardened. "Why should I?" "That song is all I have left of my mother and grandmother. It's ours. It's personal." Alexander nodded, understanding even as it gutted him. In his world, nothing came free. Everything had a price. If he wanted her memories, her story, her time, he would have to pay. "I'll make you an offer," he said, slipping back into the cadence of a deal-maker. "Quit this job today. I'll pay you 5 times your salary to work for me. Your only responsibility will be helping me uncover the truth behind that song. I'll cover your rent, your bills, your child's needs, everything. In return, I ask only for your memories." Lily stared at him as if he had lost his mind. A stranger in a $1,000 suit was offering to rewrite her entire life. It was insane, dangerous, and yet, for the first time in years, she felt a fragile flicker of hope. The next morning, the city painted a stark contrast between 2 lives. In Alexander Crowne's penthouse, the day began with calls to Hong Kong aides, briefing him on markets trembling after his latest acquisition. Across the river in Brooklyn, Lily May stuffed a few clothes into a worn canvas bag, her hands trembling with uncertainty. Outside her apartment, a sleek black town car idled an alien machine against cracked sidewalks. Inside, a brand new car seat already waited for Cody. It was Alexander's first silent gesture, a promise of protection. Their destination was not a boardroom or a courtroom, but something far more intimate, the old home of Lily's grandmother in Queens. The small wooden house had sat untouched since Rose's passing 2 years prior. Dust coated every surface, the air thick with lavender and old paper. It was a time capsule, each object preserved like an unspoken memory. "She never threw anything away," Lily murmured, leading Alexander and Gavin Reed, his head of security, down the narrow hall. She said every object had a story. Photographs lined the mantel, a young Lily, her late mother, and Rose, a woman with kind eyes and a knowing smile. Alexander felt a sharp pang. Though he had never met her, something in Rose's gaze struck him with aching familiarity. The attic, Lily whispered reverently. She called it her memory chest. Ever cautious, Gavin tested the pull-down stairs before allowing them up. Dust swirled in weak sunlight as they climbed into the cramped space. In the far corner rested a massive steamer trunk bound with tarnished brass straps. When Gavin forced the latch open with a metallic groan, Alexander's heart raced with anticipation greater than any deal he had ever closed. This wasn't paperwork or rumors. This was the source code of his life. Inside lay yellowed baby clothes, pressed flowers, bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon. And at the very bottom, nestled in velvet lining, was a thick leather-bound journal. The cover bore a single initial in faded gold leaf R. Lily's hands shook as she lifted it. Her voice barely a whisper, Rose's diary. Alexander's pulse thundered. The answers he had sought his entire life were no longer fragments of song or memory. They were written, bound, waiting to be read. They gathered in the small living room, the leather diary resting on the coffee table like a relic. Lily's fingers trembled as she opened the fragile cover, revealing looping cursive now browned with age. The first entries were simple. Rose as a young woman describing her first job, her dreams, her ordinary life. Then one date leapt out, October 12, 1968. Lily read aloud, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. Started my new position today. Ashworth Manor, Long Island. A palace of stone and ivy. My charge is young Catherine Ashworth, 17. She is slender, restless. She laughs like wind chimes, but her eyes carry storms. I think we will be friends. Alexander froze. The name struck him like a physical blow. Catherine Ashworth, his mother. The diary unfolded a hidden tapestry. Rose chronicled life inside the gilded cage of Ashworth Manor, the domineering patriarch Harrison Ashworth, and his suffocating hold over his daughter. Then one spring night, another name appeared. April 5th, 1969. Catherine has a secret. His name is Robert, a painter with little money but eyes full of a universe. She slips away to his studio, and I cover for her. I know it's wrong to lie, but her joy is radiant. He looks at her as if she is his entire world. Alexander's throat tightened. Robert, his father. An artist, not a businessman. Suddenly, the haunting poetry of the lullaby made sense. It wasn't just a song. It was love turned into melody. Then came the entry that changed everything. July 22nd, 1969. Catherine is with child. Robert's child. She is terrified yet overjoyed. Harrison must never know. Tonight, Robert composed a lullaby for the baby, and Catherine wrote the words. They sang it beneath the willow by his studio under the crescent moon. They call it The Willow Weeps for the Moon. It is the most beautiful, heartbreaking thing I have ever heard. Silence blanketed the room. For Alexander, the fragments of his life were no longer scattered mysteries. They were truth, a song, a tree, a moon born of his parents' love. But as Lily turned the pages, the handwriting grew frantic, darker. Harrison Ashworth was closing in. Lily's voice faltered as Rose's words devolved into desperation, the ink smeared and jagged as if written in terror. Alexander leaned forward, every muscle taut, bracing for the truth he both longed for and dreaded. March 14th, 1970. He found out. Today, Harrison stormed the cottage. His fury was fire. He called Robert a parasite, a fortune hunter. He called Catherine a disgrace. He dragged her away, her screams echoing through the woods. He swore the child would never live under his roof. He swore he would take care of it. I have never feared for her more. Lily's eyes glistened. The room was so silent they could hear Cody's soft breathing as he played oblivious to the storm brewing around them. The next entry was scrawled in shaky, near illegible script. March 18th. Catherine is gone. Harrison has hidden her. He threatened me if I speak, my family will suffer. But the baby, Catherine's beautiful boy, was born 2 nights ago. I saw him for only a moment. He has her eyes. Then a nurse paid by Harrison took him. They sent him to St. Jude's foundling home. Catherine begged me to ensure her son had this Robert's locket engraved with the willow and moon. I pressed it into his blanket as they carried him away. It was all I could do. I have lost my friend, and the boy has lost his mother. Lily's voice broke on the final word. She closed the diary slowly, her hands trembling. Alexander sat rigid, breath ragged. The shards of his life fell into brutal clarity. He was that child stolen, stripped of name and parentage, abandoned by design of one man, Harrison Ashworth. The air thickened with grief and fury. Lily wiped her tears, whispering, "My grandmother carried this secret all her life. She mourned you even if she could never speak your name." For Alexander, it was no longer just a lullaby. It was blood, betrayal, theft, his entire life rewritten by cruelty. He surged to his feet, jaw clenched, eyes blazing with resolve. "Find him," he growled to Gavin. "Find Harrison Ashworth. And find my mother. This is no longer history. This is war." 2 days later, a black sedan rolled through the towering wrought iron gates of Ashworth Manor. The estate loomed like a fortress of stone and ivy, magnificent, immaculate, colder than any boardroom Alexander had ever conquered. Every brick seemed to whisper of secrets of lives controlled and silenced. Inside the vast library, Harrison Ashworth awaited. At 91, he remained formidable. His hair was stark white, his body gaunt yet unbowed. His piercing blue eyes locked onto Alexander the moment he entered. He did not rise. Mr. Crowne Harrison rasped, his voice dry parchment, sharp steel. "My staff tells me you were insistent. State your purpose. My time is precious." Alexander advanced slowly. From his coat, he placed the silver locket on the mahogany desk, just as he had in the diner. The willow and moon glimmered under the dim light. For a fraction of a second, recognition flickered in Harrison's eyes, discomfort quickly masked by cold dismissal. "A trinket," he said flatly. "If you're here to sell me relics, you've wasted your journey." "It belonged to your daughter Alexander," said evenly. "Catherine. My mother." The silence that followed was razor sharp. Then Harrison's thin lips curled into a contemptuous smile. "Ah, so you are the boy. I wondered when the past would come crawling back." "You stole her life," Alexander's snarled fury breaking loose. "You locked her away. You stole her child and dumped him in a foundling home like trash." "I protected her," Harrison retorted, voice cold as marble. "She was fragile, polluted by a penniless painter. I preserved her. I preserved the Ashworth name. Look at you. Your grit, your empire. I gave you that. You should thank me." The arrogance was staggering inhuman. Alexander's fists clenched, jaw rigid. He had come seeking answers, but now he understood this was no man to reason with. This was a tyrant who mistook cruelty for virtue. "I want to see her," Alexander demanded. "That is impossible," Harrison hissed, mask slipping. "I am her guardian. Only I have access. Leave now, or you will regret ever reaching beyond your station." Alexander did not flinch. He leaned forward, voice a growl. "You didn't erase me. You created me. And I will not stop until she is free." The moment Alexander Crowne left Ashworth Manor, the battlefield was drawn. Harrison had legacy political influence, the law itself. But Alexander wielded truth, wealth, and a lifetime of rage forged into resolve. The war erupted not in alleys, but in sterile law firms, regulatory offices, and media leaks. Within days, Alexander's empire came under siege, surprise audits, frivolous lawsuits, hostile headlines seeded by Harrison's loyalists. It was a strategic bleed meant to distract, to force retreat. But Alexander did not retreat. He delegated his empire to trusted executives, narrowing his focus to a single target, Briarwood Grove Sanitarium. "Find me a way in," he told Gavin Reed, voice flat and dangerous. Gavin's team combed health codes, state laws, obscure amendments, and then they found it. A recent patient rights amendment stipulated that even under guardianship, a patient could not be denied contact with a direct blood relative unless declared unfit by a court-appointed physician, not just the facility's doctors. It was their opening. Alexander ordered DNA testing. Quietly, samples matched. The results were irrefutable. He was Catherine Ashworth's son. With Rose's diary and Lily May's sworn affidavit, the case was unshakable. 2 weeks later, in a New York courtroom, Judge Maria Hernandez presided. Harrison's lawyers thundered about delusions, opportunists the sanctity of guardianship. But the judge was unmoved. She examined the DNA, the diary, the testimony, and her eyes hardened. She ruled in Alexander's favor, immediate unrestricted access to Catherine Ashworth. For a shuddering moment, Alexander closed his eyes. He had broken through the wall of lies. He would see her not a ghost, not a name in a diary, but his mother. Beside him, Lily whispered fiercely, "This isn't just your fight. My grandmother carried this secret for you. I'll be there when you meet her. For her. For Rose." The next battle would not be fought with lawyers. It would be fought with memory, love, and a lullaby. The drive upstate was heavy with silence. Briarwood Grove hid behind towering pines and iron gates, more country club than hospital. Its serene gardens and stately architecture masked the truth, a gilded prison for the wealthy's inconvenient secrets. Alexander strode the halls like a man aflame. Lily May kept pace, eyes wide with fear and resolve. Gavin followed, sharp gaze sweeping every corner. A stern-faced administrator greeted them with disdain. "She has good days and bad," she said, leading them down plush hallways. "Decades of medication. Don't expect much." When the door opened, time froze. Catherine Ashworth sat by the window, a cashmere blanket over her lap. Her once dark hair was now snowy white, her skin fragile, translucent. Her Ashworth eyes stared blankly at the garden light, long extinguished by decades of isolation. Alexander's heart clenched. For years he had imagined laying flowers on a grave. He never imagined this alive yet hollow, her spirit buried in silence. He knelt before her, voice breaking. "Catherine, my name is Alexander. I'm your son." Her gaze drifted to him, polite confusion, no recognition. It was worse than he had feared. His crusade, his war. And she sat distant, unreachable. Despair crushed him. The Titan became a lost boy. Then Lily stepped forward. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. She began to sing. "The willow weeps, but not in sorrow." The melody wrapped the room like sunlight through storm clouds. Catherine's head tilted slightly. A flicker stirred in her eyes, fragile, fleeting, real. Alexander held his breath. Lily sang louder, pouring into each line the love Rose had carried for half a century. Then Catherine's lips parted, a frail, raspy voice joining the song. Alexander's tears flowed freely. The lullaby had reached where court orders could not. It had awakened his mother. 6 months later, the 85th floor penthouse no longer resembled a cold museum of wealth. The sterile marble lines were gone. In their place, sunlight spilling over warm fabrics, the scent of Lily's baking mingling with Catherine's favorite perfume, Cody's drawings taped proudly on the billion-dollar refrigerator. Alexander Crowne, once worshipped and feared in boardrooms, now found his truest victories in the laughter of a child echoing through his home. Catherine, no longer a ghost, sat in the sunroom, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. In her hands she held a framed charcoal sketch, her young face captured by Robert's loving hand. She traced the lines, whispering, "He always saw hope in me, even when I was afraid." Lily set down a tray of tea and cookies, smiling. Rose used to say he had a universe in his eyes. I think he just put it on paper. They shared a silence, not empty, but full of history, of grief endured, of love reclaimed. News had come a month before Harrison Ashworth was dead. He died alone in his cold library, surrounded by books no one would ever read. For Alexander, there was no triumph, only somber certainty. The man who tried to erase him had erased only himself. One evening, as the city glowed below, Alexander placed the silver locket in Catherine's hands. "It's always been empty," he whispered. "I never knew what belonged inside." Her fingers caressed the engraving of willow and moon. Tears shimmered. "Your father told me it wasn't meant for the past, but a promise of the future." She looked from Alexander to Lily, then to Cody's laughter in the next room. And the future turned out more beautiful than I ever dreamed. She closed the locket, pressing it back into Alexander's palm. "Its story is complete. Our story is complete." For the first time, Alexander realized wealth wasn't measured in numbers, but in voices around a table, in love reclaimed from silence, in a lullaby that had finally found its ending.